December 17, 1940. Springfield, Massachusetts. The war room smells like cigarette smoke and desperation. General George Lynch stands at the head of a mahogany table scarred with coffee rings and the weight of impossible decisions. Around him sit men in pressed uniforms with faces that haven't slept properly in weeks. Outside, the winter wind rattles the windows of the Springfield Armory like it's trying to get in, or maybe it's trying to warn them about what's coming. Britain is bleeding. France has fallen. Hitler's armies are steamrolling across Europe with mechanized fury the world has never seen. And America, neutral, unprepared, caught flat-footed, has exactly 74,000 M1 Garand rifles in its arsenal. 74,000. The army needs millions. Lynch slides a folder across the table. Inside are production estimates that read like a death sentence. The M1 Garand, America's pride, its cutting-edge semi-automatic rifle, costs $85 per unit to manufacture. At current production rates, it would take 5 years to arm even half the force they'll need when America enters the war. We don't have 5 years, Lynch says. His voice is flat, matter-of-fact. We might not have 5 months. Across the table, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses adjusts his tie. His name is Colonel Rene Studler, and he's just returned from a trip that changed everything. 3 days ago, he stood in a factory outside Birmingham, England, watching British soldiers train with a weapon that shouldn't exist. A submachine gun so crude it looked like it was assembled in a garage. It was the Sten gun. 9 pounds of stamped metal, springs, and spite. It fired 9mm rounds at 500 rounds per minute, and it cost the British government exactly $11 to produce. $11. The Americans in that room had spent months perfecting mills and lathes and tolerance measurements for the Thompson submachine gun, a beautiful, reliable weapon that also cost $200 per unit and required 40 hours of skilled machining. Meanwhile, the British were cranking out Stens in bicycle shops using sheet metal and spot welding. Studler leans forward. Gentlemen, we're building Cadillacs when we need to be building Jeeps. Someone laughs, nervous, bitter. Another officer shakes his head. You want us to copy the Limeys? That gun jams if you look at it wrong. It jams, Studler agrees. And it's ugly, and it rattles. But you know what else it does? He pauses, lets the silence settle like snow. It exists, in quantities that matter. They've made over 100,000 in 6 months. We made 15,000 Thompsons in 3 years. The math is brutal. The room knows it. Lynch lights another cigarette. So what are you proposing? Studler opens his briefcase and pulls out a single sheet of paper, a sketch, rough and unfinished, drawn on a flight back from England. It shows a weapon that looks less like a gun and more like a pipe dream. A tubular receiver, a wire stock, a bolt that could be stamped out of flat steel. We build our own, he says. Simpler than the Sten. Tougher. Something a factory worker can assemble in an afternoon without ever touching a lathe. Something we can make for $15. $15. The room erupts. Some call it genius. Others call it suicide. One officer stands up and says what they're all thinking. You're asking us to arm American boys with stamped tin and prayer. What happens when it fails in combat? What happens when a GI pulls the trigger and nothing happens? Studler doesn't blink. What happens when he doesn't have a gun at all? The argument rages for another hour. Engineers are summoned. Blueprints are demanded. The phrase good enough for government work gets thrown around like an accusation, then like a reluctant blessing. By midnight, the decision is made. 2 men are given the impossible job. George Hyde, a gunsmith with steady hands and zero patience for bureaucracy, and Frederick Sampson, a corporate engineer from General Motors who thinks in terms of assembly lines and man-hours. Together, they have one mandate: design a submachine gun that's so simple, so cheap, and so mass-producible that America can flood the battlefield with them before the Axis even knows what hit them. They have 60 days. The weapon they create will arm more soldiers than any gun in American history. It will be hated by the men who carry it, loved by the generals who requisition it, and feared by the enemies who face it. It will be called a grease gun, a plumber's nightmare, a stamped steel abomination. Its official designation, the M3. And 70 years after the last one rolls off the production line, it will still be in service, long after the M1 Garand, the Thompson, and every other superior weapon has been retired to museums. But none of that matters yet. Right now, it's just a sketch on a desk in Massachusetts. A $15 gamble. A desperate prayer that quantity, raw, unforgiving industrial quantity, can beat quality before the world runs out of time. January 28, 1941. General Motors Inland Division, Dayton, Ohio. The factory floor sounds like the inside of a thunderstorm. Punch presses slam down with hydraulic fury, each strike shearing through steel plate like it's cardboard. Spot welders throw blue-white lightning across the assembly line. The air tastes like hot metal and cutting oil. This is where they build car parts, door panels, fenders, transmission housings. Mass production at its finest. Today, they're building something else. George Hyde stands at a workbench with a half-assembled prototype in his hands, turning it over like he's inspecting a particularly ugly fish. He's 52 years old, built like a fire hydrant, with hands that have assembled more firearms than most men have fired. He designed submachine guns for the British before the war. He knows what works. This thing in his hands barely qualifies. Frederick Sampson approaches with a clipboard and the kind of optimism that only comes from never having been shot at. Well, Hyde grunts, sets the weapon down, picks up a grease gun from the maintenance rack, the kind mechanics use to lubricate car axles, holds it next to the prototype. The resemblance is uncomfortable. Both are tubular. Both have a similar cylindrical profile. Both look like they were designed by someone who'd never seen an actual firearm and was working from a vague description shouted across a noisy room. It looks like a goddamn grease gun. Hyde mutters. Sampson grins. Good. That means it's simple. Simple is the understatement of the decade. The M3 has exactly 43 parts. The Thompson submachine gun it's meant to replace has over 100, where the Thompson requires skilled machinists and precision tooling. The M3 is designed to be assembled by workers who've never touched a weapon in their lives. The receiver is a machine. It's two halves of stamped sheet metal welded together like a soup can. The barrel isn't rifled in the traditional sense. It's cold hammered and broached, a process that takes minutes instead of hours. The bolt is a block of steel with a face. The firing pin is a nub that sticks out the front. There's no selector switch because there's no semi-automatic mode, just full auto. 30 rounds of .45 ACP at 450 rounds per minute. You pull the trigger and it empties the magazine. Period. Even the stock is an insult to traditional gunsmithing. A length of wire bent into a vague shoulder brace shape, the kind of thing you'd expect to see holding up a chain link fence. Hyde picks it up again, pulls the bolt back. The sound it makes is less ka-chunk and more ka-thunk, loose, rattling, like something's already broken. He points at downrange at the test target, a wooden frame with layered canvas. Fire when ready, Sampson says. Hyde squeezes a cocking handle, aims, pulls the trigger. The M3 roars to life. 30 rounds in under 4 seconds. The noise is deafening, not sharp like a rifle, but a low, hammering bark that echoes off the factory walls. Spent casings spray across the concrete floor like brass rain. Smoke curls from the barrel. When it's over, Hyde sets the weapon down and walks to the target. Every single round hit, within a 2-foot circle at 25 yards. Sampson joins him, grinning like a man who just won a bar bet. See? Effective. Hyde stares at the target, then back at the gun, then at Sampson. It's a piece of shit. It's a cheap piece of shit, Sampson corrects. We can build 10 of these for what one Thompson costs. 100 for what a Garand costs. It doesn't need to be elegant, George. It needs to exist. Hyde knows he's right. Knows that in 6 months, maybe a year, American boys are going to be storming beaches and clearing bunkers and fighting in cities where firepower matters more than accuracy. Knows that a soldier with a crude, reliable submachine gun is infinitely better off than a soldier with no gun at all. But that doesn't mean he has to like it. By March, the design is finalized. By May, production begins. General Motors retools its assembly lines. The same ones that were stamping out Oldsmobile fenders last year are now churning out M3 receivers. Ford gets involved. Guidelam Corporation joins in. The gun that looks like a plumbing accident becomes the fastest weapon to go from concept to mass production in military history. Cost per unit, $14.86. Assembly time, 5.6 man-hours. And the nickname, unofficial, inevitable, and absolutely perfect, spreads through the ranks faster than the weapon itself. Grease gun. It sounds like an insult. It is an insult. But insults have a way of becoming terms of endearment when something works against all odds. The first shipment leaves Dayton in July 1942. Crate stamped with military codes and handled with care labels. Even though the gun inside is built to be dropped, dragged through mud, frozen in foxholes, and still fire when you need it to. 12,000 units, headed for North Africa. The men who receive them aren't sure whether to laugh or cry. British commandos look at the M3 and immediately ask if the Americans are serious. Paratroopers strip them down, inspect every part, and wonder aloud if this thing will blow up in their hands. Tank crews, on the other hand, tank crews love it immediately. It's compact, it fits in tight spaces, and when you're bailing out a burning Sherman, you don't care if your weapon looks pretty. You care if it fires. And the M3 fires. In the deserts of Tunisia, in the hedgerows of Normandy, in the frozen hell of the Ardennes, it fires. It jams less than anyone expected. It survives conditions that destroy better guns. And when it does break, any idiot with a screwdriver can fix it in under 2 minutes. But this is only the beginning. Because the M3 isn't just a wartime stopgap. It isn't just a cheap alternative. It's about to become something nobody predicted. A weapon so over-engineered for simplicity that it outlasts everything designed to replace it. November 8, 1942. Algiers Harbor, North Africa. The landing craft hits the beach at 0347 hours, and Corporal James DeMarco is the third man out. He's 22 years old, from Pittsburgh, and he's never fired a shot in combat. None of them have. Operation Torch is America's debut in the European theater. A 3-pronged amphibious assault on French North Africa designed to trap Rommel's Afrika Korps between British forces in the east and American forces in the west. In theory. In practice, DeMarco is chest-deep in cold seawater, holding a weapon he's fired exactly twice, trying not to trip over his own boots as mortar rounds start exploding up the beach. The M3 weighs 8 pounds loaded. It's slung across his chest on a canvas strap that's already digging into his shoulder. The wire stock is folded against the receiver because nobody's figured out how to deploy it quickly while running through surf in the dark. He clutches it like a lifeline anyway. Tracers light up the darkness. French colonial troops, officially neutral but defending the harbor anyway, are firing from pillboxes and rooftops. The sand kicks up in angry spurts as machine gun fire stitches across the beach. Someone screams. DeMarco doesn't look back. He hits dry sand, drops behind a low concrete barrier, and for the first time in his life, pulls the M3's cocking handle back. The bolt slides with that same loose, rattling sound from the factory. The sound that made him think this gun was broken when they issued it to him 3 weeks ago. The armorer had laughed, said if it rattles, it works. If it doesn't rattle, then you worry. A German MG-42 opens up from a stone building 50 yards ahead. The sound is unmistakable, 1,200 rounds per minute, a buzzsaw tearing through the night. 2 men from DeMarco's squad go down before they can find cover. Sergeant Kowalski, a career soldier with a Thompson slung across his back, slides in next to DeMarco, suppressing fire. Now! DeMarco pops up, aims at the muzzle flash, and squeezes a trigger. The M3 bucks in his hands. 30 rounds of .45 ACP downrange in 4 seconds flat. He can't tell if he hit anything, can't tell much of anything through the smoke and adrenaline, but the MG-42 goes quiet for a moment, and that's enough. Kowalski is already moving, waving the squad forward. They cross the beach in a chaotic sprint. 10 men with a mix of Garins, Thompsons, and M3S, all try and reach the seawall before the machine gun opens up again. They make it, barely. DeMarco's hands are shaking. He ejects the empty magazine, fumbles for a fresh one from his musette bag. The magazine slides in with a hollow clunk. No bolt release. The M3 doesn't have one. You have to manually pull the bolt back again after every reload. It's slow, clumsy, inefficient, but it works. For the next 6 hours, they fight their way through Algiers street by street. The M3 becomes an extension of DeMarco's body, awkward and ugly and reliable in ways he didn't expect. When they breach a hotel that's been converted into a strong point, the grease gun's compact size lets them maneuver through doorways and stairwells where the longer Garand would be a liability. When sand gets into the action, and sand gets into everything in North Africa, the M3's loose tolerances mean it keeps firing anyway. By dawn, the harbor is secure. DeMarco sits on a curb, weapon across his lap, watching the sun rise over the Mediterranean. The M3's barrel is still warm. The wire stock, which he finally figured out how to deploy, is bent slightly from where he used it to smash through a window. Kowalski walks by, stops, looks down at the grease gun. "Ugly bastard, isn't it?" he says. DeMarco nods. "Saved my life, though." Kowalski grunts, keeps walking. That sentiment, reluctant respect mixed with aesthetic horror, spreads through the American ranks over the next 2 years. The M3 never wins beauty contests. It never gets the love letters that soldiers write about the M1 Garand, but it earns something more valuable: trust. In Italy, paratroopers jump into Sicily with M3S strapped to their legs because the wire stock folds compact and doesn't snag on parachute lines. In the Pacific, Marines fighting through the jungles of Guadalcanal and Peleliu learn that the M3 survives humidity and mud better than the Thompson, which has too many small parts that rust and seize. Tank crews adopt it universally. When you're a Sherman commander and your tank gets hit, you're bailing out through a hatch that's barely 2 feet wide. You don't have time for a full-length rifle. The M3 fits in the space between your seat and the ammunition rack. It's there when you need it, and it doesn't get in the way when you don't. Truck drivers love it. Combat engineers love it. MPs and rear echelon troops who need personal defense but aren't frontline infantry, they all love it because the M3 is idiot-proof in a way that more sophisticated weapons aren't. But the frontline infantry? They're divided. Some, like DeMarco, come to appreciate it. Others despise it, call it a coward's weapon, complain that it's inaccurate beyond 50 yards and useless in open terrain. They want Garands. They want Thompsons. They want something that feels like a real gun, not a hardware store accident. The complaints reach Washington. By 1944, Army Ordnance is already working on replacements. Guns with better ergonomics, better sights, better everything. The M3A1, an updated version with minor improvements, enters production. Plans are drawn up for post-war submachine guns that will be lighter, faster, more accurate. The assumption is that the M3 will be retired as soon as the war ends. A stopgap measure, a wartime necessity, a gun born of desperation that will fade into history once the desperation passes. That assumption will be wrong in ways nobody can predict, because in a frozen forest in Belgium, on a morning that will define a generation, the M3 is about to prove something that no engineer or general anticipated, that sometimes the simplest answer is also the one that refuses to die. December 16th, 1944. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. 0530 hours. Private First Class Eddie Novak wakes to the sound of the world ending. The German artillery barrage is unlike anything he's ever heard, and he was at Omaha Beach. This is different, heavier, more concentrated. 16-inch shells scream overhead and detonate in the snow-covered pines with enough force to uproot trees and turn frozen earth into volcanic craters. The bombardment is so intense that men 50 yards from the impact points die from concussive force alone, their lungs ruptured, blood trickling from their ears. Novak rolls out his foxhole and into chaos. The 106th Infantry Division, green, untested, rotated into this quiet sector for easy duty, is being annihilated before it can even form a defensive line. Through the smoke and falling snow, Novak sees German armor, panzers and tiger tanks, gray shapes moving like prehistoric beasts through the trees. Behind them, thousands of infantry in white winter camouflage. Ghosts in the fog. The Battle of the Bulge has begun. Novak's M3 is frozen solid. The bolt won't move. Ice has locked the action. He slams it against a tree trunk, once, twice, until something breaks free and the bolt cycles. A crude solution, but the M3 was built for crude solutions. His squad is scattered. Sergeant Mills is dead, cut in half by a tree that exploded from a direct shell hit. Lieutenant Carson is screaming orders, but nobody can hear him over the artillery. The line is collapsing. Novak runs. He's not proud of it, not ashamed either. You can't fight tanks with small arms, and staying in that foxhole means dying for no reason. So he runs through the forest with a dozen other survivors, trying to reach the rally point 3 miles west. They don't make it. A German patrol, 12 men, MG-42, Sturmgewehr rifles, cuts them off at a frozen creek. The Americans dive for cover behind fallen logs and snow banks. Carson goes down immediately, shot through the throat. A private named Kelly returns fire with his Garand. Gets off 3 rounds before a burst from the MG. 42 nearly cuts him in half. Novak is behind a log, breathing hard, hands numb. The M3 is covered in snow. He wipes it off with his sleeve, pulls the bolt back. It moves. Barely. The cold is making everything sluggish. But the weapons lose tolerances. The same tolerances that make it rattle and look cheap. Mean there's enough play in the action for it to function, even when precision guns would seize up. The Germans are advancing. They think the Americans are finished. Novak waits until they're 20 yards away, then rises and fires. The M3 empties its magazine in a single sustained burst. At this range, accuracy doesn't matter. Volume does. 3 Germans go down. The others scatter, diving for cover, buying Novak and the 2 remaining men from his squad enough time to retreat deeper into the forest. They spend the next 4 days behind enemy lines. No food, no resupply, no communication with command. Just survival, hiding in abandoned barns, stealing potatoes from cellars, moving only at night. The temperature drops to 15 below zero. Novak's feet are numb. His trigger finger is frostbitten. The M3 impossibly still works. On the 3rd night, they stumble into a German supply depot, a farmhouse being used to store ammunition and fuel for the advancing panzer columns. 2 guards outside, smoking cigarettes, stamping their feet against the cold. Novak doesn't think, just acts. He moves through the darkness, gets within 10 yards, and opens fire. Both guards drop. The sound brings more soldiers pouring out of the farmhouse. 6, maybe 8, all armed. Novak empties another magazine, drops behind a stone wall, reloads. The other 2 Americans, Kelly, somehow still alive despite his wounds, and a radio man named Briggs, open fire with a Garand and a carbine. It's not a firefight. It's an execution. The Germans are backlit by the farmhouse door, silhouetted perfectly. They don't stand a chance. When it's over, Novak and his men set fire to the fuel depot and disappear back into the forest. 3 days later, they reach American lines near Bastogne. Novak is delirious from hypothermia. Kelly dies from his wounds 2 hours after they're evacuated. Briggs loses both feet to frostbite. Novak keeps his M3. He's asked about it later by a war correspondent doing a story on the siege. Why the grease gun? Why not a Thompson or a Garand? Novak looks at the correspondent like he's insane. Because it worked, he says. Everything else froze. Garand seized up. Thompson's jammed. The M3 kept firing. It's not poetry. It's not even particularly articulate. But it's the truth that defines a weapon. The Battle of the Bulge lasts 6 weeks. American casualties exceed 80,000. But the line holds. Bastogne holds. And when historians later analyze the defense, they note that American infantrymen, outgunned, outnumbered, freezing, held their ground in part because their weapons, even the crude ones, refused to quit. By the time Germany surrenders in May 1945, over 600,000 cubic meters submachine guns have been produced. They've seen action on every continent where Americans fought. They've been carried by infantrymen, tankers, paratroopers, engineers, and MPs. They've been loved, hated, mocked, and relied upon. And they've done their job. The war ends. Parades are thrown. Soldiers come home. The defense industry shuts down overnight. Factories that were building tanks and bombers and guns retool for washing machines and automobiles. Military contracts are canceled. Warehouses fill with surplus equipment. The M3, logically, should be retired. It was a wartime expedient. A desperate measure for desperate times. There are better designs now. More modern weapons. The M3A1 improved some of its flaws, but even that's considered outdated before the ink dries on the peace treaty. Except nobody bothers to officially retire it. And in Korea, 5 years later, when American forces are rushed into combat with whatever equipment happens to be in the nearest depot, the M3 reappears. Still functional, still firing, still refusing to die. It becomes a pattern. A ghost that haunts military armories for decades. A gun that was supposed to fade away but instead lingers, outliving its contemporaries, outliving its purpose, outliving every logical reason for its existence. But the real question, the one that nobody asked in 1945, is why? Why does this ugly, crude, $15 gun outlast everything else? The answer won't become clear March 23, 1991. Somewhere in the Iraqi desert, 70 miles from Kuwait City, Staff Sergeant Marcus Chin sits in the commander's hatch of an M60 Patton tank, watching the sunrise paint the sand orange and gold. The Gulf War is essentially over. Saddam's army is in full retreat. Coalition forces are mopping up the last pockets of resistance before the ceasefire takes effect. Chen's unit hasn't fired a shot in anger for 3 days. This is the boring part of war. The waiting, the checkpoints, the endless desert patrols. His hand rests on a weapon that, by all rights, shouldn't exist anymore. It's an M3A1 grease gun, manufactured in 1944, 47 years old. It sits in a bracket next to the seat, the same place it sat in American tanks since World War II. The wire stock is bent. The finish is worn down to bare metal in places. The serial number is barely legible, but it works. Chin has fired this exact weapon, or one identical to it, in training exercises. He's cleaned it, maintained it, cursed it for being outdated. His father, a tank commander in Vietnam, carried an M3. His grandfather, a Sherman driver in Europe, carried one too. 3 generations. One gun. Hey, Sarge. His loader calls up from below. Why the hell are we still using these things? Didn't they invent new guns since 1944? Chun smiles. It's a fair question. The military has replaced nearly everything else. The M1 Garand gave way to the M14, which gave way to the M16, which evolved into the M4. The Thompson submachine gun was retired in the 1950s. The grease gun's contemporaries, the British Sten, the German MP40, the Soviet PPSH-41, are all museum pieces. But the M3 remains, not on the front lines, not with infantry, but in tanks, with vehicle crews and armories and depots around the world. It persists like a cockroach that survived the apocalypse. Because, Chin says, nobody's bothered to replace it. That answer sounds flippant. It's not. It's the absolute truth. The M3 was designed to be so simple, so cheap, and so reliable that it became invisible. It was never important enough to upgrade. Infantry got priority for new weapons. Special forces got the latest technology. But tank crews? They got whatever worked, and the M3 worked. More than that, it worked perfectly for its role. Tank crews don't engage in sustained firefights. They don't need accuracy at 300 yards. What they need is a compact weapon that fires a lot of bullets very quickly if someone gets too close to their vehicle. Something that fits in a cramped space. Something that won't break if it's been sitting in a tank for 6 months without being touched. The M3 does all of that. And because it costs almost nothing to maintain, no complex parts, no expensive ammunition, no specialized training, the military just keeps using it. By 1991, the Defense Department has tried multiple times to replace it. The M3 was supposed to be replaced by the M16 in the 1960s, but M16S are too long for tank interiors. Then by the CAR-15 carbine in the 1970s, but that required expensive modifications to storage racks. Then by the Beretta M9 pistol in the 1980s. But tankers rightfully pointed out that a 9mm handgun is not adequate defense against enemy infantry trying to board your vehicle. Every replacement program stalls. Every alternative costs more money, requires more logistics, or creates new problems. So the M3 remains. Not because it's the best weapon. It's not, but because it's good enough, and good enough as a way of outlasting perfect. Chen's radio crackles. Orders to return to base. The war is officially winding down. He takes one last look at the desert, then climbs down into the tank. The M3 goes back into its bracket. It will sit there for the next several years, until this tank is decommissioned. Then it will be transferred to another tank, or shipped to a depot, or packed into long-term storage. But it won't be destroyed. And that's the strange immortality of the M3 grease gun. It doesn't die because nobody cares enough to kill it. Fast forward to 1996. The U.S. military officially retires the M3 from frontline service. Replacements are finally, belatedly, issued, mostly M4 carbines and MP5 submachine guns. The few remaining M3s in active use are sent to reserve units, then to National Guard armories, then to long-term storage facilities in the Mojave Desert and rural Pennsylvania. The gun that was supposed to be a stopgap measure has served for 54 years. But even retirement isn't the end. In military depots around the world, M3s sit in crates marked serviceable or ready reserve. In theory, they're obsolete. In practice, they're still functional. And in the strange economics of military logistics, functional equipment is never truly gone. It's just waiting. Philippine Special Forces use M3s into the 2000s. Taiwanese harbor defense units carry them on patrol boats. In the United States, some federal agencies, the ones that inherited surplus military equipment and never bothered to update, still have M3s in their armories. As late as 2017, soldiers report seeing M3 grease guns in inventory during base inspections. Not in use. Just there, sitting in the back of an arms room like a relative who showed up to Thanksgiving 40 years ago and never left. There's something almost supernatural about it. A weapon designed in desperation, built to last just long enough to win a single war, somehow outliving every superior gun that came after it. The Thompson, heavier, better made, beloved by gangsters and GIs alike, retired in the 1950s. The M1 Garand, the greatest battle implement ever devised, according to General Patton, retired in 1965. The M14, the M3's supposed successor, retired by 1970, replaced by the M16. Even the M16 in its original form has been replaced multiple times by improved variants. But the M3, the crude, ugly, $15 stamped steel abomination that looked like a plumber's nightmare, it served from 1942 to 1996. 54 years of continuous military service. Longer than any American-designed firearm before or since. Not because it was the best. Not because it was loved. But because it was simple. Because it worked. Because in a world of planned obsolescence and constant technological advancement, the M3 grease gun was so over-engineered for reliability that it became unkillable. There's a lesson in that, maybe several. As the last M3s sit in climate-controlled storage, waiting to be either scrapped or sent to museums, they remain what they've always been, proof that sometimes the cheapest, ugliest answer is also the one that refuses to die. June 6, 2019. The National World War II Museum, New Orleans, Louisiana. An old man stands in front of a glass display case, staring at a weapon he hasn't seen in 60 years. His name is James DeMarco. He's 97 years old now, uses a cane, and his hands shake with the tremor of age. But his eyes are sharp, and they're locked on the M3 grease gun mounted on a wooden plaque behind the glass, wire stock folded, barrel pointed upward, a small brass plate beneath it reading, U.S. M3 submachine gun, .45 caliber, in service, 1942 to 1996. His grandson, a college kid with a history degree and infinite patience, stands beside him. That the one you carried, Grandpa? DeMarco nods slowly. North Africa, Italy, all the way to Germany. His voice is thin, worn by decades, but steady. Hated the damn thing at first. Looked like someone built it in their garage. But His grandson prompts because there's always a but. DeMarco smiles, just barely, but it never let me down. Not once. Around them, the museum is filled with the carefully preserved artifacts of the Second World War. Uniforms behind glass, medals in velvet-lined cases, a Sherman tank, meticulously restored, sitting in the main gallery like a mechanical dinosaur. Everything is polished, reverent, frozen in time. But that M3 in the case, that gun looks different. It's not polished. The metal is worn. There are scratches, dents, signs of actual use. It looks like what it is, a tool that was meant to be used hard and thrown away. Except it wasn't thrown away. Did you know, DeMarco says quietly, that when the war ended, they told us these guns are temporary? Said they replaced them with something better once we won. He taps his cane against the floor. Took him 50 years. His grandson laughs. That's government efficiency for you. But DeMarco shakes his head. No, that's not it. He leans closer to the glass, studying the weapon like it's a puzzle he's trying to solve. They built it so simple that there was nothing to improve. You make something complicated, there's always a better version coming. But you make something that just works? Can't improve on that. Can only replace it with something more expensive. It's an interesting thought, one that historians and military analysts have debated for decades. Why did the M3 outlast everything else? The technical answer is straightforward. Simplicity equals longevity. Fewer parts mean fewer points of failure. Loose tolerances mean the weapon functions in conditions that would destroy precision firearms. Stamped steel construction means it's nearly impossible to break through normal use. But there's a deeper answer, a philosophical one. The M3 was designed at a moment when America had confronted an uncomfortable truth, that perfection is the enemy of enough, that in war, having 1,000 adequate weapons is better than having 100 perfect ones. That survival often depends not on having the best equipment, but on having equipment that refuses to quit. It's a lesson the military learned in 1940, and then promptly forgot. By the 1950s, American weapons design was back to chasing perfection. The M14 rifle was over-engineered, too powerful for its role, and lasted barely a decade before being replaced. The M16, when first deployed in Vietnam, was marketed as a space-age marvel that didn't need cleaning, and then jammed constantly in the jungle because it absolutely did need cleaning. The M3, meanwhile, just kept working. Not in the spotlight, not in the recruiting posters, but in the background, doing the unglamorous job it was designed for year after year after year. And maybe that's the real legacy. Not that the M3 was a great gun, it wasn't, but that it represented a moment when America built something it wasn't proud of, something crude and expedient, and discovered that sometimes the crude answer is the right answer. In an age of billion-dollar fighter jets that can't fly in the rain, of tanks that cost more than a small nation's GDP, of weapon systems so complex they require software updates and specialized technicians, the M3 grease gun stands as a relic from a different philosophy. Build it simple. Build it tough. Build it cheap enough that you can make 1 million of them. And maybe, just maybe, it'll outlive everything you're proud of. DeMarco turns away from the display case. His grandson helps him toward the exit, moving slowly through the galleries filled with the preserved memory of a war that ended 74 years ago. As they leave, a school group enters. Kids, maybe 12 years old, loud and distracted. The way kids always are in museums. One of them stops at the M3 display. "What's that?" she asks her teacher. The teacher glances at the placard. A submachine gun from World War II. Something called a grease gun. Why'd they call it that? Because it looked like a grease gun, I guess. Like what mechanics use. The kid makes a face. "It's ugly." The teacher nods. "It is, but it worked." Sometimes that's all that matters. The kid shrugs and moves on, already distracted by something else. The moment passes. The gun remained behind the glass, silent and unnoticed, the way it spent most of its service life. But somewhere in a military depot or a police evidence locker or a collector's safe, there are M3 grease guns that are still functional, still loaded, still waiting. Because that's what they do. They wait. They endure. They outlast. The $15 gun that outlived every gun America ever built. Not because it was the best, but because it was built to survive everything except irrelevance. And somehow, even that couldn't kill it.